Commodore Eric Thompson spent 37 years in the Navy, much of it aboard submarines, both conventional and nuclear. Today he's giving me a tour of the magnificent HMS Alliance, now preserved at the Royal Navy Submarine Museum.
Dan.
Here we go. Is it like
this is an A-class submarine, and I used to serve in one of these.
Trip down memory lane for you?
Yeah, HMS Alliance. It was 1969-70 when I was one of these, which is a rather long time ago.
And what is an A-class? What does it do?
Well, it's a diesel-driven submarine.
Okay.
And this class was built for high-speed transits in the Second World War from Trincomalee across to the Malaya area, where the Japanese had taken control. And this submarine is very fast on the surface. It could do about 16 knots. Okay. But in the Cold War, it really wasn't much use because it was very noisy. If they were snorting, running the diesels, they're solidly mounted to the hull.
But the idea was it would sink surface vessels or other submarines or what?
Surface vessels, really. I mean, these Mark 8 torpedoes you would have had are very similar ones.
And these are the tubes, are they?
These are tubes, 21 inch in diameter. One is for keeping beer, the other is for keeping warshots.
There's a beer in there?
Yeah.
Is that something that happened when you were at sea?
Yes, yes, we kept stuff up. One of the tubes usually. It keeps the beer cool.
Well, I'm glad you're having fun.
And
so what? I mean, you say Second World War. So this is basically a World War II submarine, is it?
Well, not quite. It's World War II designed for World War II operational requirements. But I think Alliance herself, this one, didn't actually come into life until after the war was finished. The one I was in actually did clock in a couple of months of the war. But it's got a lot of modern equipment. I'm not sure. This is emergency breathing system. All these little breathing points are what you'd plug into if you were flooding up or whatever.
The mind boggles. And then you got life jacket here for the case you have to.
That's yes for escaping, and you'd need that on the surface once you were up there, because once you've escaped, you haven't any lifeboats. You're just bobbing around. So.
I mean, you probably get bored of people saying this, but for those of us who haven't been in submarines, we find it terrifying, the idea of being underwater and emergency breathing and having to escape.
No, I'll tell you, what is terrifying is being in the London tube in the rush hour and thinking of, the 7-7 bombs going off in the tube or the King's Cross fire, and there's no chance of getting out. But in a submarine, you feel you're in control of things. You're surrounded by competent people who know the drills.
Yeah.
And
makes sense.
What if you're going to suffer from claustrophobia? You wouldn't get beyond the hatch.
Were there any guys my height?
One or two.
I don't know.
I don't know how they slept.
I don't know how they did it.
Yes.
What were the suits? So let's take me through it. Now we're allowed to call it a boat, aren't we?
Yes, boats.
Right.
Submarine boats.
Why
yes.
are submarines boats and other vessels are ships?
I think because way back in the early days, they were quite small compared with all the mighty warships across there, and they were very much down market. In the First World War, before the First World War, when submarines came in, they came in 1901. It was our first submarine, and it's here, by the way, in the museum, Holland 1. The people who involved in submarines were seen as dirty, smelly, piratical, and nothing to do with the real Navy. And in fact, the First Sea Lord at the time described submarines as unfair, underhand, and damned un-English. and said that any submarines who captured should be hanged as pirates, and that is why we fly the Jolly Roger coming back from war patrols.
Oh yes.
It's not braggadocio. It's actually it's two fingers up to Admiral Wilson. It was, yes.
Brilliant. Right, let's keep going. You got bunks here, torpedoes here. There's not much in the way of sort of separation of space, is there?
No, men would be sleeping in here. There would be more torpedoes, of course, in when she was in service.
And is this your personal kit in here? Is that?
No, I think that's more like to be, probably escape equipment.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
But so certainly bunks suspended on top of gear and...
Yep, and I have slept in a torpedo rack. If you go on board as an extra, as I did when I was a squadron officer, there aren't any bunks for you.
Really? And so you get to know each other pretty well?
Oh yes, yeah. Now here's an interesting tale. This electrical switchgear, it's 220 volts system they have, direct current from a battery. This would have been built by Whip-and-Bone in Rochdale. And when I was in Andrew, which is a sister ship to this, or a brother ship really, with a name like Andrew, we happened to be anchored off Pwllheli in Wales for the investiture of Prince Charles as Prince of Wales. The next evening we were having a cocktail party on board for the yacht club, and this guy was there, and the captain sent for me and said, "Eric, who made our switchgear?" I said, "Whip-and-Bone, Rochdale." And he said, "This is Mr. Whip."
Oh, really?
And I brought him back here, and the two of us sat in here, and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, "My brother designed this." Wow. And sadly his brother died testing electrical equipment for Polaris submarines. It was a very touching little
nice to meet
incident.
the people responsible for it. So, and in here, this would be, give me a sense of what this would be like underway, or would it be noisy?
Very noisy. This is the engine room. As you can see, those are the engines there. So it's just a singular compartment. These are the generators and electrical generators. And notice that this copper here would be live.
Live?
Live, yes. So no health and safety at work here. These bars are to help you.
So if you touch that, you would die?
You would probably be electrocuted, yes.
Okay, so...
We had to wear rubber-soled shoes, of course.
In the stupidest, give me the absolute idiot's version, a submarine moves underwater because, a bit like a hybrid car today, you charge the battery when you're on the surface and use the battery when you're underwater, is that right?
Yes, yes. And in this old-fashioned class of submarines, there's a clutch. So you could, say in harbour, run the engines and the generators to charge the battery. Yeah. When it's seated either propellers, you clutch in. In fact, there's a thing there.
Engine clutch. Yeah.
But in diesel-electric boats, which followed, there's no direct drive from the engine to the propellers. The engines just make electricity through a generator, and it's electrical wires which go to a motor which drives the propellers. Okay. It's much quieter
So a bit like modern electric cars?
Sort of, yes. Now these are the conrods here. They're external. Well, they move up and down and work the tappet.
So those would, again, if you got your hand trapped in there, that would be...
Yeah, when she's steaming along, these are all going up and down all the time.
Amazing, isn't it?
Really quite noisy. And there's the size of a piston.
What? Look at the state. That's a huge piston, isn't it?
And 420 revs, I remember, is maximum speed used on the surface. Just order up 420 revs and off you went.
And do you try, in a submarine, do you try and cruise on the surface where possible?
Diesel boats did, because it's slightly faster. Nuclears wouldn't, no.
So nuclears, because you've got unlimited fuel, you can just cruise along.
Yeah, and also because the teardrop hull, it's actually pretty dangerous on the surface. If any waves at all, because you're going through the waves. And in fact, in the early days, there was a lookout when Courageous actually went through a large wave off the Hebrides somewhere, and the poor lookout was sucked out, never found. So after that, they had to belt in. But there's no real reason for a nuclear submarine to be on the surface. And
so in the Second World War or your early service, you only went underwater when you were sort of approaching the enemy?
Yeah, I mean, a boat like this would have crossed the Indian Ocean from Trincomalee and then dive and gone down the Malacca Straits and then look for targets. As a matter of interest, these are that's the exhaust going overboard.
Okay. When you say dive, I mean, this is so revolutionary. This is as important as human beings going into the air is our ability to fight and operate underwater.
Yeah. Well, I think adding to that, in the Second World War, a submarine like this, it was all periscope sightings for your target. In the Cold War, you're into sonar, and it's listening and sound analysis, very, very high-tech stuff.
And in the Cold War, presumably, unlike your friends in the infantry in Germany who are sitting around, looking at the Soviets through binoculars, you were playing games. I mean, you were coming up against them and testing yourself against the opposition, right?
Well, there were two different kind of branches of the submarine service. One was the strategic nuclear deterrent submarines with intercontinental ballistic missiles. They simply went out and disappeared. Yeah. Their three main priorities were: one, remain undetected; two, maintain constant communications; and three, be at 15 minutes readiness to fire. 15 minutes. The SSNs, which are what we used to call hunter-killers, their roles entirely different. They go out to find Soviet submarines and ships. And they did surveillance patrolling, so in conjunction with the Americans, we're part of the relay. You know, we always had at least one SSN up in the Barents Sea, keeping an eye on what was going on up there. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is you would be wanting to hoover in all the radio signals, radar signals, so that you could record the characteristics of the latest Soviet missile radars or whatever, pick up the communication, see what they're talking about. You'd carry Russian interpreters, and also get up close to their ships to get their sound signatures. And with that intelligence, you could feed it out to all the other submarines, and indeed anti-submarine aircraft like Nimrods with sonar buoys and frigates. So we all had these encyclopedias of what the electronic and sonar sound signatures are of as many Soviet craft as we could. So that was that one role. The second role was to see if in our case, the Soviet Northern Fleet was looking like it was getting ready to go to sea big time, and if so, why? Was that an indicator of impending war? And the third role would be to try and latch on to one of their missile submarines as it left Murmansk and trail it. And when we've done that, we trail it all the way down to the American coast. So they were quite busy, and that was, you know, the exciting stuff. But, you know, in both cases, we don't talk about... I mean, one of the nation's most closely guarded secrets is where do our missile submarines patrol? Yeah. And only 3 people on board knew where we were. I mean, I was the senior engineer of Revenge, and only once did I know where we were, and that was because we had a particular problem the captain explained to me. But it was normally just the captain, the navigator, and the XO knew where we were. And in the surveillance boats, you know, not everyone knew where they were. They would know they were a sort of sneaky patrol, but they wouldn't, apart from the captain and the people directly involved, they wouldn't know.
But all the crew in here, that, you know, that's the only thing you have with the outside world: depth in feet. You know, you know how far underwater you are, and apart from that, you don't know anything else.
No.
Terrifying. Right, let's keep going. So,
terrifying,
no one would have slept in here because this is the engine room.
Yeah. Well, this is where the engine room artificers would have controlled the actual engines from. You've got the engine clutch here. Yeah. You've got the supercharger clutch, fuel pump, control of the spray valves.
And then this is what the instruction is.
This would be the order to, you know, stop engines or slow half. Full ahead is an emergency. You only ever use full ahead for an emergency. Standing charges when the boat's maybe in harbour and you want to charge the batteries, so you don't want the propellers turning.
So I've got, now that we're all talking about electric cars, I've got range anxiety. How long would you be able to go in a vessel like this just on batteries?
Well, it depends what you're doing. If you're sitting in the body and doing nothing, probably, I don't know, a day and a half maybe. Yeah.
If
you're going around at a fair speed, then you're using up the battery quickly, and you'd have to probably you'd be wanting to snort every 6 hours.
So you have to get the snorkel up and put the diesels on and charge batteries up.
Yeah.
What depth do you have to be to do that?
50 feet, just a bit less than that, I think. Okay. I think from memory the next class was about 54 feet.
So this to me looks pretty old-fashioned. I mean, it's pretty remarkable that you first went to sea in things that were, you know, Second World War, very mechanical, and then you spent the rest of your career on nuclear-powered submarines.
It ended up sitting in front of a bank of dials with just a little... Well, in fact, a nuclear reactor almost needs an extra explanation, but the nuclear reactor is so brilliantly well designed. It's what you called load-following and self-regulating. All we did, if we wanted to go faster, the guy on the throttles, which it's just a little tiny lever on a desk, and he just moves it up from stop to full speed. And the steam comes off from the steam generators, which are heated by the reactor, and the reactor then becomes, it's getting cold water returning into it. The cold water is denser, acts as a greater moderator, and increases the nuclear reaction, and it makes more heat. And it just kind of automatically follows. It's it's hands-off.
Well, that sounds like a miracle to me.
It sort of is, really.
What's through
Now
here?
this thing here, Dan, that's the main snort induction hull valve. That's where you that's the start of your snorkel tube.
Okay.
And that's a boat sinker, so that's a very important valve if we ever have to shut it.
Because there's a hole in the hull there.
Yeah,
Right.
like about 14 inches in diameter.
Crikey. Right, this looks a bit more domestic through here.
Well, now we come into the accommodation space part of the submarine. This is a galley.
So how many people would this be expected to cook for?
I can't remember the exact numbers. I think we had a crew of about 60.
60 people?
And they'd be eating 3 meals a day and the rest. Oh, and the chefs are the most amazing people. They just I don't know how they do it. It's fantastic.
And this is
a bathroom.
60 people. What was the smell like on a submarine after a few weeks at sea?
The predominant smell was diesel fumes. Yeah, these are the heads and bathrooms. Now you see, the A-boats, some of them anyway, had this little thing to put your feet on because some naval doctor thought it was healthier to have your knees above your bottom when you're sitting on the
I
side.
have heard that. I've heard that it's better to get your knees up. Now, there was one submarine, a German submarine, that sank with a malfunctioning toilet, wasn't there? So there's a...
Funnily enough, toilets. If you ask me what's the thing that worried one most on, say, a deterrent patrol, it was blockage of your overboard sewage hull valve.
Actually, that's true.
That's not a joke. You know, if you've got 150 blokes probably operating the valves twice a day, and if the sewage tank fills up and you can't pump it overboard, you've got problems.
Communications?
Yeah, this would be the wireless office.
Quite roomy in there.
It is. In fact, I have a unique tape recording of a ship's concert, which I happen to organise because I'm that way inclined. And we did it in here, and we put it out over the loudspeakers around the mess decks.
Now, this feels like an important place.
Yeah, this is the control room. And you have the 2 periscopes here. One is the attack periscope, the other is the search periscope. This is the search periscope, which is the larger one. It's binocular. This is the attack periscope, which is monocular.
Oh, so okay.
And it's got a very slim top to it, so when you're doing an attack, you're just exposing this little tiny bit, whereas this one's quite big.
What an amazing space. And so it would be the skipper in here. Yeah, so will you have been in here?
Yes, I was a watchkeeper in here. And this is very old-fashioned radar. And it's an Admiralty pattern plotting table, which kind of followed the movement of the boat. And
so when the periscope is down, it drops into that?
Down into there, yeah. And when it's coming up, I mean, I'm an engineer, so I wasn't. I did do periscope watches, but I was not. I never did an attack. That was the captain's job, and it's very personal to the captain. And you've possibly heard of the thing called the perisher, the periscope commanding officers qualifying course. It's called, known as the perisher, because if you fail it, you don't get a second chance. You're out of submarines. And it's a pretty demanding course, and they do a lot of periscope attacking. They did in my day. I don't know what they do now, because I don't think they can do with nuclear submarines what they did with these. You know, you're actually playing chicken with frigates. You can't play chicken with nuclear submarines in the same way. But you know, the captain would be down on his knees, you know, as the periscope's coming up, and saying up slow. There'd be a man over there operating hydraulics, and he would, you know, be on it as it broke surface, and then he'd say, you know, well, is the expression we used, and he tried to keep as little as possible exposed.
God. So it really, every inch it's above the surface makes a big difference.
Well, it's just obviously more to be seen by a ship, more to be picked up on radar.
Did you feel when you were in submarines that you were the hunters, or were you the prey?
No, we were the hunters.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, British submarines always were.
So surface vessels were scared of you?
Well, no, they wanted to sink us. I mean, during the Second World War, we lost the entire strength of the submarine force during the war, replenishing it throughout, of course, but the strength we had at the beginning was lost. And a lot of our work was done in the Mediterranean, and in fact, although it's not generally appreciated, submarines played a key part in the victory at El Alamein, because we were hitting Rommel's supply lines from Italy to North Africa. But
I mean, you know, in terms of your ethos, did you by the time you were serving, how had the technology shifted? Did you feel you had more advantages, or did you feel the advantage lay with the surface vessels and the aircraft?
Well, you can be a bit myopic about these things. We always felt we were invulnerable and that they were a target. I mean, we call surface ships targets. That's the terminology. But nuclear submarines, very difficult to deal with them because they can go as fast and faster than the surface ships, and in bad weather, like for example when the task force was going down to the Falklands, terrible sea conditions, you can't go very fast, as you'll be well aware, in high seas, but a submarine can just hammer along at 30 miles an hour at 400 feet. So it can catch up with surface fleets. It can come up from astern, and
it's quiet.
And it's quiet, and surface ships. And this is one of the reasons I volunteered for submarines. My father was in the Navy during the war, and he was on convoy, so he was in the anti-submarine game. And I fancied originally being captain of a destroyer. I failed the eye test for being a seaman officer, so I became an engineer. But anyway, out in the Far East, when I was a midshipman in Barossa, an old battle-class destroyer, we used to anti-submarine exercises against this class of submarine out of Singapore. And we could never find the damn things. They were also, the submarine would fire a green grenade to say, "I've just torpedoed you." Oh. And I thought that, well,
I want to be on that team.
We're now in the era of nuclear submarines, and we can't even handle a submarine like this. So I thought the answer is nuclear submarines. And I'd grown up with the idea that U-boats almost starved the country out during the Second World War, and indeed during the First World War. And I thought, well, if this country has got to be an anti-submarine force, the anti-submarine force has got to be submarines. Was it poacher to catch a gamekeeper to catch a poacher? What is that expression? Poacher turned gamekeeper. Yeah. And because of the new nuclear submarines, these massive sonar sets, which they could take deep, so the surface ships are big sonar sets, but they're bouncing around in the surface, and you get thermal layers in the surface because of the sun. That bends sound rays, etc. Submarines duck underneath, you can't hear them. So that's why I volunteer for submarines.
Speaking of, is this the helmsman here?
That's the helmsman, yeah.
So that's where they're steering the ship from, the boat.
Yeah. And that's to give you your the gauge glass.
And
and
this is the instruction to the engine where we just were.
Yeah, exactly so.
So if you were off to the warships,
that'd be the Revolutions.
So if you mentioned being in a heavy sea, it must be an amazing thing when it's very rough and you dive down and instantly it's flat calm, is it?
Yeah.
Right, let's keep going. I still haven't seen that many places where people can actually sleep.
We're coming to it now. This is the officers' mess, the wardroom as we call it.
Very nice, yeah.
This is my bunk here.
Oh, so you sleep in here? It was not just...
Yes. And this here is the ship's office. It consists of a typewriter.
So during the day it's for eating and game playing, and then in the evening,
well, actually, it's a problem because these are the upper bunks. You can't get them up when people are sitting in the seats, of course. And sometimes it's difficult to get enough sleep in. Probably one was living on 4 to 6 hours sleep a day.
God. Well, it hasn't done you any harm. Too busy. So you must have made great friends with those fellow officers, I'm telling you.
Oh yes, big chums, yes. It was difficult to believe it was all so long ago. I always like the A-boat layout for accommodation. It's like a corridor train. It's very cosy and chummy. And I think this was the artificers' mess. That's the technicians. But there would have been, as you can see, 6 blokes lived in there.
But they're all on watch at different times, so some of them must want to have a chat and the other ones are trying to sleep.
Yeah, well, as long as you've got your bunk, you'll get to sleep. That's not a problem.
God, you've got to know each other well.
And this is another of the senior-rates messes.
But, I mean,
now, as a matter of interest, we were standing on top of the forward battery. HMS Riga, which is a sister ship, had a battery explosion.
Really? So would everyone have their own bunk, or would you be hot bunking?
No, I think in these older submarines we had our own bunks.
Okay. But in some of the modern ones?
Some of the modern ones, funnily enough, you do hot bunk.
You turf someone out and get in.
That's and burns oxygen canisters. So when you're low on oxygen, that's what you do.
Just top yourself up.
And those are carbon dioxide scrubbers. And now we're approaching the forward torpedo compartment, which seems seems to be so small compared with, you know, a nuclear submarine, which could carry something like 21 torpedoes. But you can see they would have double racks here, which I don't know how many torpedoes should carry now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, maybe, and 4 up the tubes, 12 torpedoes.
And your Heinz baked beans there as well.
Heinz baked beans. And of course, one of the other roles of submarines is to let the heroes from the SBS slip ashore.
So you'd surface, put a canoe on and then they'd...
Different ways of doing it, yes. For this submarine, that's what you did. You surfaced usually at night. Didn't fully surface. You had to... You didn't give full buoyancy, and just enough to get the hatch open, and you get these guys out and off they go.
God.
But with modern submarines, we've got sort of canoe release capsules, you know, sort of steel things, and they just go up into them and then be let out from there, and the submarine wouldn't have to surface.
And then obviously you can fire from both ends.
Yep.
So this is a Second World War design used during the Cold War. How different would they be today?
Oh, massively different. Almost no comparison, really, apart from the fact that they're steel tubes. I mean, a nuclear submarine, for example, is twice as wide. Well, a sort of early generation Cold War nuclear submarine, twice as wide as this. She'd be carrying 21 torpedoes or more in her forends. But the modern submarines are carrying, you know, tube-launched cruise missiles for hitting Afghanistan. As well as torpedoes and indeed things like Sub-Harpoon, which is a torpedo tube launched anti-ship missile. It's like Exocet, you know. But so they've got a mixed bag of armaments, and then you go to the missile submarines, which the ballistic missile submarines, their targets are 4,000 miles away.
So they're huge, huge.
And they are massive.
Missiles.
I mean, a Trident submarine, you could probably put 2 of these inside one.
But some things about the service haven't changed.
No. Well, actually, funnily enough, nuclear technology or not, the critical point was the sewage overboard hull valve. And I don't know why. It must have been because the ship designers were thinking biologically. But we had 2 of everything, port and starboard generators, port and starboard engines, etc. But we only had 1 sewage overboard hull valve, and if that blocked, you were into corporate constipation. And there's, I mean, we exercised the submarine who did have that problem, and the crew had to use waste paper baskets as improvised lavatory pans and take their offerings to. We used to have a little downward pointing torpedo tube. It's called a gash gun. It's just a dustbin on, but you actually had to sort of
blast it.
I don't think you blasted it out. I think you pumped it out, but it was like a torpedo tube, and so they had to put their offerings in there, and all very primitive. But in the trade, as we call the submarine service, these are known as sewage tubes.
Okay, there we go. So some things are still the same.
Yes.
Managing human sewage. Well, it will all be drones one day.
Well, actually, it's operationally, it's a command decision to empty your sewage tank.
That is. Welcome to the History Hit YouTube channel, which we are relaunching. We've got all the best exclusive content going straight onto this History Hit YouTube channel. And you can find out, for example, why on earth I'm standing at the top of this mast. You should probably subscribe.